When you look at our history and examine the course of human understanding, it's pretty obvious that we were able to figure out all kinds of different things. But the thing that I always found to be very odd is that after all of these years, the one thing that we haven't been able to pin down is what things are in the first place. I know this sounds like a sophomoric question or something that's childish, but most people actually don't sit down and try to figure this thing out. But when you do, there is this strange doorway that you approach. There is this portal that's open that delivers you into an entirely different world of understanding. And this understanding isn't just intellectual fodder for you to sound more interesting at social gatherings or in comment sections. It's something that completely obliterates and reorganizes your priorities. Everyone who in good faith sits down and tries to detangle what a thing actually is, they all walk away from this inquiry with this same conclusion. Something fishy is going on. Things are not as they appear to be. And that conclusion may come off a bit vague, but it only serves as the launch pad into a specific line of inquiry. And as you follow this thread, you come into your next big realization, which is that reality is an artifice of some kind. And this word artifice doesn't necessarily imply artificiality. It isn't as simple as claiming that reality isn't real. This word artifice means device. There is some kind of mechanism at play. And this sentiment has been being expressed all throughout the history of humanity. It appears to be one of our most deeply rooted core beliefs. It has been expressed as us being a spirit or soul inside of a body, us being in a hallucination, an illusion, a dream, or the way that it's trendy to express it these days, that we live in some kind of simulation. Although the context has been evolving over the years, the basic model remains the same, and they all cluster around this belief that we live inside of something. People aren't just saying these things because it sounds cool or woo-woo. Well, perhaps some people are, but they are quickly exposed as not being the real deal. This is empirical. There is a consistent set of conditions that you can reliably reach, and these conditions give the impression that we exist inside of something. And this is where it gets really tricky to explain and you begin to lose people, but it's not like we are, for example, these fish inside of a fish bowl. You can't be that literal about this. It's some kind of spiritual apparatus, some kind of psychic device. I guess the best way that we can all understand it is that we are locked into a specific set of conditions, and it all centers around what we call things or objects. We are locked into this framework of what's referred to as the subject-object relationship. I'm sure many of you have heard it expressed as dualism. You could say that our minds work with contrast, context, that there has to be a background and a foreground. Without this interplay, our perception turns off. It is this simple premise that is the platform on which our intelligence rests. That's what intelligence is. It is the apprehension of pattern. It is the apprehension of this interplay. I've called it connections, relationships, etc. This is what things or objects are. It is the ability for something to have contrast. It is the ability for something to have a background and a foreground, an inside and an outside. I talked about this in my previous video. We see this within basic science when discussing entropy. The way that we determine a system to be an entropic system is completely arbitrary. As long as you are able to slap a conceptual border around it, you have created a new entropic system. The piston on your car is its own entropic system. The engine that piston belongs to can be its own entropic system. And the car in totality, you can have this system of having things within things within things, because what things are connections, relationships. It is this way of existing with these borders. Not only is this the way that reality is to us, it appears that this is the way that things have to be. We cannot escape it because whenever we try to do so, something weird happens. We have this natural instinct as human beings that we begin to see emerge in our adolescence. We run to the end of intelligence and see that it actually has some kind of edge. Or in other words, if intelligence is the apprehension of objects, what we do is try and conceptualize the largest object possible. And in today's language, we call this thing the universe. If you ask anyone today, they would tell you that we exist on a planet that is inside of the universe. This is the culturally accepted answer. However, I think it is precisely here where the trick lies. This thing that we call the universe isn't what we think that it is, not one bit. There's outer space, sure, I'm not denying that, but this thing that we refer to as the universe doesn't necessarily have to deal with outer space. This is all a contrivance of language. There is something hidden in our perspective, which I'm trying to illuminate. This thing that we refer to as the universe, this proper noun, it is actually a psychic apparatus that we are all inside of. At least that's the way that I like to put it. But to keep things a tad bit more down to earth, you could say that it is the title given to a concept. To put it as simply as possible, it is a placeholder term for the summation of all knowledge and understanding. Since our perception is in essence things or objects, it necessitates a kind of final object. You could call it a metaphysical object or a mental object. But it is what gives context to all of its contents. It is the final backdrop. I guess you could equate it to the screen that contains the movie that you're watching. And the reason I refer to it as a psychic apparatus instead of an actual object is because, as I previously mentioned, objects require contrast. It has to have an inside and an outside. However, this final object has no outside. This is why whenever you are learning about science, when you're 12 or 11 years old and you discover the universe, the first thing that you ask is, well, what's outside of the universe? And the answer that you'll most commonly get is nothing. Of course, I'm referring to the traditional viewpoint of the universe. I'm fully aware of what's considered the full universe versus the observable universe, multiple universes. I know about all of that. And these concepts are probably going to pop up later in this video, but this is the normal traditional way of viewing it, that our universe is expanding. However, it's expanding into nothing. Whatever way you want to look at it, it is ultimately the container that holds all human knowledge and understanding. But it doesn't just simply contain all knowledge. It's also what allows knowledge to exist in the first place. And this is where things get really tricky and complicated. But this contraption is fixed. However, its contents could be infinite. This is why I keep trying to reinforce that there is obviously some kind of mechanism at play. This is clearly seen because what we have been calling the universe has been changing historically. It's always changing. For example, when you were 5 years old, the universe was your household, mom and dad. Everything outside of that was just no man's land. When we were evolving out of the primate species, our universe was the plains and forests in Africa. When you look at our previous geocentric and heliocentric models, we obviously had a different conception of what the universe was. And today we call it the universe. But people on the cutting edge of the sciences already know and understand that it isn't that simple. So in this case, this universe is sort of a moving visage. It's just like the atom. I talked about this in a previous video. The original conception of the atom, the Greek atomus, this word atom means indivisible. It is an idea or a concept that represents the literal fabric of reality, the thing that nothing else can be smaller than. And in our search for this, we discovered what we all call today the atom. You know, the Bohr model, the old thing that you learned in high school. I may be dating myself here. But then we went on to discover that, wait, actually, this isn't the real atom. There is this whole subatomic world. Then there is this quantum world. And if you buy into the whole string theory, you get down to this Planck scale where anything beyond that just ceases to make sense. So you can clearly see that this idea of the atom is a moving visage that you can follow into infinity. And what I'm saying is that the universe is just like that. And it is just like that because they are one and the same. It is the exact same thing. It is a manifestation of this psychic contraption that we are all in. And this contraption that we are all in is what we call knowledge. It is what we refer to as intelligence. And from our perspective, it appears to be expanding. This is why you think that you are smarter today than what you were yesterday. This is why we can look at all of these previous reality models and just come to the conclusion that they were somewhat ignorant. They didn't have the full picture. But as I continue along this journey of understanding, I'm actually starting to believe that phrasing it as expanding doesn't quite cut the mustard because you would ultimately be expanding into nothing. I think that something really spooky is going on. Rather than expanding, I think that something closer to an implosion is occurring, and I promise you I'm going to explain what I mean by this shortly. But first, I want to sort of tie a bow and really reiterate why I refer to this intelligence as a psychic contraption. This device has a fundamental architecture that has something to do with infinity. Infinity is very strange. As far as math is concerned, it is representative of some kind of error. It signifies that you took a left somewhere when you probably should have taken a right. But despite this, the general consensus is that the universe is somehow infinite. And I think that it's this way because we really don't have a good grasp on what infinity is. I think that it is purely metaphysical in nature. I think that infinity is some kind of symptom or perhaps a byproduct of intelligence, this perception that we all have, the way that we view reality, this contrast or this back and forthness. And as a result, we are experiencing this phenomena of time, or as Plato phrased it, time is the moving image of eternity. There really can't be any intelligence without infinity. You wind up in this paradoxical situation with Occam's razor. And for those of you who don't know what Occam's razor is, to surmise it, it states that the simplest answer is usually sufficient, that you shouldn't unnecessarily multiply variables. You shouldn't make things more complex than necessary. But the paradoxical conundrum here is, for there to be intelligence, you always have to choose the most complex answer. You wind up in this weird situation where the simplest answer is the most complex one. A simple example here is, if you launch an object into space, if you throw a rock into space, the consensus is that it just goes on forever. But you see, it has to be that way because the only alternative would be for it to just simply cease to exist, to be Thanos'd out of existence. And that option is the most ridiculous. That is the option that is the end of intelligence. It is by definition the most absurd. So in order for intelligence to continue to engage with this object, it has to go on forever. For it not to do so would just be for it to not be intelligible. I remember in one of my previous videos, someone left a comment and asked if I've ever considered that perhaps there is never nothing, that nothing doesn't exist. And this is my entire point, that intelligence means that there is always something. Because perception needs to grasp. It needs contrast. It has to have something else in order to exist. So you see that this psychic apparatus has something to do with us being trapped within the walls of eternity. It has something to do with time, because time is the moving image of eternity. It's like this weird 2D side-scroller video game, like the old Mario video games where you can go to the left or the right and you will always be in this same frame of reference. But the key takeaway from this analogy is, if we are actually within the walls of eternity, this implies that eternity does indeed have walls. There is some kind of boundary. And I think that this boundary has something to do with infinity. It's kind of like if I locked you inside of a room, an inescapable room, everything outside of this room instantly becomes infinitely far away from you. It's kind of like that old expression of how something can be so close yet so far away at the same time, or parallel lines. Two parallel lines can never intersect, no matter how close that they are to each other. But instead of this being some kind of room with these fixed walls that you can bump and slam into, this room adjusts to where we are inside of it. The more that you try and run towards any particular wall, the wall appears to retreat the same distance away from you. And this is precisely why I refer to it as a psychic device or apparatus. In regards to the apparatus portion, you can clearly see there is a specific set of conditions that it keeps in place at all times. This is, in essence, what a device does or accomplishes. And I call it psychic because it appears to be purely metaphysical in nature, whatever that means. You could call it psychic, spiritual, perhaps mental. I don't know. I don't really make these grand distinctions between those terms. You can pick whichever one floats your boat. But there is some other dimension at play. And history is filled with people trying to illustrate this very concept, and it is normally depicted as being some kind of apparatus, some kind of object. You see, one of the strangest social phenomenon that I've witnessed within recent history was this whole flat earth thing, the flat earth movement. And during this time, everyone made it their business to pile onto these people to try and prove how stupid that they were. But no one really sat down and took the time to analyze exactly what was taking place. I mean, it was the biggest case of mass psychosis since the whole UFO craze. In the same way Carl Jung analyzed the UFO phenomenon as some kind of psychic object, an eruption of the unconscious, you can apply this similar Jungian analysis here, that these flat earthers, what they are actually doing is describing the psyche. The same way that Jung believed these alchemists of the past were doing this naive form of psychotherapy, that the contents of their psyche were being projected onto material reality. You could say that these flat earthers are doing the same thing. They are taking the literal map of the psyche and projecting it onto reality. And if you've ever come across the cosmological maps produced by the flat earthers, they all look eerily similar to the Jungian diagram of the self, and it isn't coincidental. Every historical depiction that I've come across of this situation, they all show this same recurring theme, that we are indeed inside of something, whether this is the domed firmament or whatever. And it is this contraption that I am referring to. This is the psychic apparatus. If you want to call it the material world, fine. If you want to call it ego consciousness, that's fine too. I think that they are all the same thing. But what in the world is it? Some mysteries I think that we are not meant to understand, but I feel if you can at least solve this portion of the puzzle, you have everything that you need to at least live life the way that it should be lived. Because as I advance on this journey, the one thing that is becoming apparent is there are indeed things that you should and should not be doing. I know that people want to give this impression that you are just free to do as you please. disease, but I think that there are severe consequences for this. It's as the scripture says that it is through a lack of knowledge that my people perish. And within Western thinking, when you look at ancient philosophical systems like Platonism or Neoplatonism, it is quite literally a contraption that was crafted by a cosmic force, a cosmic entity, Yaldabaoth. Is it a bad thing or a good thing? I guess it depends on whose side of the story that you choose to believe. Is it the logos? This is another term that you see within ancient philosophical systems, and this term has been quite the shapeshifter. Its meaning has been evolving over time, but I actually believe that the truth is somewhere in the middle, that this principle of the logos, this concept of the demiurge, they have something to do with each other. And these are pretty ancient ideas. And I think that if you were to try and pull them into the present moment, you would have to add context to what's being expressed here. And what I think is that we are inside of something, or we are under the influence of something, or perhaps you can phrase it as we are in the grips of something. And I call this phenomenon memory. And the only real world model, the only example I can think of that is close to how this all works is gravity. What gravity is to physics, memory is to psyche, spirit, however you want to phrase it. The same way that gravity is keeping you bound to the planet and stopping you from flying into outer space, memory is what is keeping us bound to reality, bound to this material existence. And just like physicists with gravity, I'm having trouble pinning down exactly what memory is. I don't know if it's a force or a field or some kind of place or location, but whatever it is the influence that forms the architecture of reality. This is metaphorically true, metaphysically true, even literally true. The architecture of who you are, your identity, is literally held in place by memory. I don't know if you've ever met anyone with Alzheimer's disease, but I have. And who they are to them goes in and out. Many times they have no idea who they are, where they are, what year it is. Who they are exists more in the memory of people who knew them than in their own memory. You can look at biology. Whenever you bite your fingernails, for example, and they grow back in the same way. This takes place because of cellular memory, your cardiac rhythms. It is all memory. We call them cycles. We call them patterns. Some people say it's vibe, vibration or frequency. But this is all what intelligence is. This is what knowledge is. And whenever discussing these kinds of topics, a common response that you get from people is, cool story, bro. What am I supposed to do with this information? And I'm starting to think that perhaps the common man may be doomed, but the entire point isn't what you do with the information. It is for you to understand that information is doing something with you. There is some kind of cosmic event or process that is unfolding that we are participants in. And I think, this is my personal opinion, I think that to us it is paradoxical. It is some kind of plot twist, some kind of punchline or weird pun, that at the end of this, it all sort of has this full circle-like effect. This is why I stated earlier in the video that from our perspective, it appears that intelligence is expanding, but I think it is something closer to an implosion or some kind of weird inversion of the way that things appear to be. And I keep referring back to this quote from David Bohm that matter is frozen light. This doesn't necessarily have to deal with literal light photons. There is some kind of underlying metaphysical principle here that I think most people inherently understand when I talk about light. There is this natural instinct that we have when you say that we are beings of light, for example, or some kind of light-filled heaven. We all naturally understand what's meant by that. It's kind of like the concept of spirit or soul. No one can actually prove that it's real, but every human being throughout history believed that we have one. And this concept of matter being frozen light is kind of this paradoxical, counterintuitive situation that I'm referring to. I just call this freezing memory. That what we all consider to be time passing is actually the expansion of intelligence. It is things happening. But if you pay attention, you'll see that this expansion of intelligence is actually the freezing of possibility into actuality. It is to take this unbounded light, if you want to call it that, and to capture it within memory, to force it into pattern. So from our perspective, or the entity that is doing the intelligencing, it looks like more and more things are happening. But in actuality, everything is slowing down. Everything is being frozen. And this is what the science point to. This is what the quote unquote universe is literally doing. It is freezing. They call it the big freeze. It is sliding into some kind of entropic state where nothing else is able to happen. This is why whenever you look at my previous videos, I use the analogy that we exist in some kind of black hole. Now, do I think that we literally live in some kind of black hole? I have no idea. Maybe, maybe not. I'm willing to humble myself at just how strange reality can be. But now that you understand that memory is analogous to gravity, hopefully you can see what I'm trying to illustrate. It could be any type of celestial body with a strong gravitational pull. Some kind of way we got sucked in. And just like with physics, there is this kind of snowball effect. Something with mass will attract something else, and then it will become bigger and have more and more mass. And its gravitational pull will just get stronger and stronger, and it will attract more and more at this accelerating rate until some kind of critical mass is reached. And this is what this process of memory is doing. There is some kind of telos. As much as people don't want you to believe it, there is some kind of end result or purpose, and it appears that intelligence is snowballing into something. I've expressed it as consciousness turning inside out. It's been expressed as the imagination becoming real. Some kind of way, everything that can happen will happen. And when that happens, you're introduced to the plot twist, the punchline, the pun. The thing that is forgotten will be remembered. And if you pay attention to the language that I use, time, intelligence, and things happening are sort of synonymous, or at least there are these indistinguishable properties. So this event that is unfolding, what happens at the end is something like time running out. You reach the end of time, which is the same as everything that could possibly happen happening, which is the same as some kind of maximum intelligence that's reached. And maximum intelligence is naturally accompanied by a realization. And I think that this realization is some kind of dimensional collapse, a collapse into some other plane or from some other plane. I talk about this on my members' platform with my members' videos. I guess Jung would phrase it as some kind of congruence between your inner and outer worlds, this individuation process, the realization of the self. The Gnostics say that it is humanity discovering their own divinity. For the Christians, it is the return of the King. Whatever it is paradoxical and turns everything on its head. It's, as the Christ says, that the first will be last and the last will be first. My take on this just isn't as anthropocentric. Most people interpret this through their own ego bias. If you are a psychiatrist like Carl Jung, you will see it within the nature of the human being. If you are a botanist, you will see it within the nature of the forest and the plants. If you are a sailor, you will see it within the nature of the ocean. If you are a womanizer, you will see it in every woman that you meet. Every relationship that you enter, everything that was once hidden, everything that you thought you could hide will be revealed. And when it is revealed, the relationship is turned on its head. Everything is participating in this, including the human being. We are all characters in a story, but this story isn't about us. And the big question becomes, just how big is the story? Because there is an interesting quirk. Although we are trapped within memory, we are locked into this dualist framework, we are able to pontificate on its antithesis. Or in other words, even though intelligence always needs something else to grasp on, we are trapped within dualism. We are able to know that oneness exists. It just doesn't make any sense and shouldn't be possible. I'm able to just naturally intuit that what we all consider to be nowhere is actually some kind of place. And this intuition is at the heart of every religious impulse within humanity. This is our religious instinct. This is what we all call faith, this thing that they have been trying to stomp out, this belief that nowhere is a place. Things that cannot be proven are still real. Within Gnosticism, this is quite literally Christ. It's called the dewdrop, the remembrance of oneness. It is kind of like this nostalgia that we are born with. We intrinsically have it because we supposedly come from this domain. Is it a place? Is it deity? Is it the one true God? I really have no idea, but I know that we interface with it via the imagination. I've talked about this in many of my previous videos, our ability to navigate this strange possibility space. And when you are in that space, you can clearly see that anything is possible. There is no such thing as something not being possible. It is pure magic. It is where the unexplainable is able to occur. It's like that famous Picasso quote that everything that you can imagine is real. And if any of this has any sort of merit, then it really calls into question exactly what our brain is. There is something strange going on with our brains that we don't quite understand. You know, we have this neuroscientific approach to it, but the brain may very well be some kind of place, or it may be some kind of thing that is accessed by some kind of place. I don't know how to put it. But one thing that I do know how to put is bread in a toaster and 2 eggs on a skillet. This video has gone on long enough, so I'm going to end things here and go make me a sandwich. And until next time, y'all have a blessed day.